worldographers and world builders alike, to episode 15 of The World Hammer, where I read lore from across the multiverse and perhaps yours. All the entries seen here are submitted by talented writers from our Tovia Discord community based on a daily prompt project called Built Together and tagged for World Hammer. If you'd like your own works read aloud here, you are not only welcome but encouraged to join our Discord and submit your own. Now back to the Forge to see what's been built. I've got a tiny bit of housekeeping up front because we have a few old prompts at the beginning, because I did tell some people, Kendamarania and Nugget specifically, that I would get back to some of theirs that were submitted a little late. I do think that in the future, I'm going to probably be a little bit harder on this because we're having so many more entries and kind of have maybe a hard cutoff date at some point. I'm going to figure out what that is later after this episode, and we'll update the world builders accordingly. But just know that this isn't going to be a consistent thing in which we have the beginning of every episode front-loaded with prompts from the previous episode. I am going to try and mitigate that as much as possible. Of course, I will always read those that I have legitimately missed, but things will change a little bit for those that are submitted really late. So, for some of our backlog, we have day 493, where the prompt was, how is magic integrated in daily life in your world? And this came from Kendamarania in the Discord, and Kendamarania had submitted Angel Tears, an entry in City of Woe. Angel Tears is a common drug found throughout Corpi. It's an opioid drug utilizing a well-known supernatural weakness of demons and sinners where they're especially vulnerable to bodily fluids coming from angels. Most of their uses come from their golden blood, lethal enough to shut down the nervous system upon skin contact. However, Angel Tears uses their other fluids, including their actual tears, sweat, and spit, all of which have lesser effects on a demonic body. When mixed together and put in a diluted water solution, it becomes a highly addictive painkiller that numbs out the nervous system, working similar to how heroin works on Earth. With overdoses or continued use, however, it gradually kills the body's nervous and respiratory system through continued burns, eventually killing all the body's pain receptors. Ingesting Angel Tears is commonly done by inhaling its vapors through a glass pipe or by injecting it in a vein. Angel Tears is a relatively new drug in Corpi, being synthesized during the Sinners' War in the 30s. It was a relative delicacy and was handed out to soldiers in the battlefield as a way to motivate them to continue fighting. After the war, it was banned by the Ars Goetia due to its harmful effects on a demonic body. Still, it became a hot commodity in the black market. The problem was made worse with foreign influence following the war, where the city of Nagana mass-produced Angel Tears through unethical means and shipped them off to the blank sinners, distributing them in poorer boroughs like Gluttony. It's almost a daily occurrence to see on the street ruined buildings housing addicts in several corners of Corpi. Sinners especially like to ingest Angel Tears, overdosing and killing off their pain receptors to feel like they're invincible from the eternal torture of hell. It always bites back at them, though, turning them increasingly paranoid to the odd voice in their head, saying they will never escape this prison. Interesting. I think you might have a bit of a misunderstanding as to how heroin works, Kendamarania. I don't believe it really does numbing so much as a complete enhancing of positive stimulants, like to a dangerous point. There's a lot of talk about how heroin can be addicting on a single use, which is why it's so damaging, and that the feelings of euphoria you have on it are exceedingly high compared to anything else you could ever experience. And then when you come off of it is when you feel all of the pain. Maybe that's kind of what you meant here, but it's not really a painkiller. It's it just really, really overly enhances your dopamine receptors and general like feel-good receptors. I'm probably getting some of this wrong too, to be fair. I'm no expert, but I would look into heroin. I mean, not in a weird way, but I would look into it. It's an interesting and very, very dangerous drug. Then we have two back-to-back Nugget submissions. The first is for day 495, where the prompt was, what are some common expressions/symbols of love in your world? And this comes from Kendamarania in the Discord. Nugget writes, the importance of being earnest, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. Content warning, mentioned suicide attempt. Phineas Cogwin was dead. Murdered. Brutally, probably by a witch who really didn't like the man. Not that that was saying a whole lot, as most of the children who even bothered showing up to the funeral had some accent of yellow in their ensemble. What was most startling, however, was the appearance of the 7 years deceased Victor Cogwin, dressed head to toe in yellow, looking 20 years older than he actually should have been. William had been rambling to Victor all night, having convinced him to stay for dinner. They ate at Ernest's place, as they didn't want to explain how he was alive to more people than he had to. At a certain point, Victor stood up, explaining he was going to go to the balcony to smoke. "I'm coming with you," Ernest said, following him. The two went out to the balcony, where Victor sat down once again and lit up his pipe. Ernest stayed silent for a few seconds, or maybe hours, before he finally spoke up. "Victor." "Yeah?" Ernest took a shaky breath, summoning the will to say what he's been wanting to say for 7 years now. "Victor." "What the f-?" Victor looked up, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. He let Ernest continue. "I walk in on you, gun to your head, and the next week you vanish. I thought you died. We all thought you died. I could have done something. I've been beating myself up for the past 7 years, wondering what I could have done to stop you. That if I was just better at talking, you'd still be here, and now you're back like nothing happened. You ruined us, Victor. What shambles of a family we had, and we're left in ruins without you. You were there when Mom tried to drown William in a bathtub and you left him behind. I had to be the one to explain to him that you weren't coming back. You were that kid's father, Victor. He got his arm ripped off because of how much he idolized you, and never once has that kid believed you were gone. Not once. Mom has been drinking herself into the grave. Edwin's been disowned. Justine's gotten married off to some guy in his 50s, and you weren't here for any of it. I've been the one picking up the pieces since you died because I felt it was my fault. And yet, through it all, Williams just had this light in his eyes because somewhere in that sweet summer child mind of his, he still believed you were going to come back for him. 7 years, Victor!" Ernest broke down crying halfway through, choking as he yelled. Victor continued to watch in silence as Ernest's temper broke down into pure, quiet heart. "I thought you died," he whispered. "I thought I wasn't able to save you." Ernest went silent except for his crying. Victor took a puff of smoke as he thought, before standing back up to hug his brother. Ernest quickly returned it, squeezing Victor with the force of a man who thought he had lost him. "I'm back now," Victor said softly. "Are you going to stay?" "No, and I am sorry." Ernest held on tighter. "It wasn't your fault, Ernest," Victor explained. "On the contrary, I'm only still here because of you." Really?" "It was a small thing, just walking in on me, telling me to stay one more day. But without it, I would have gone through with it. But I didn't. I might have left, and I'm sorry for not telling anyone. Really, I am. That was wrong of me, and it hurt you. But you're the reason I'm still out there at all. And I'm glad I am. I invented time travel. I've explored the world. I'm learning so much about the past and history and the gods. I even met someone. And I wouldn't have without you." Victor paused. "Thank you, Ernest." I suppose the common expression of love here is the hug, I'm assuming, is the impetus for this submission from the prompt. It's a very sweet piece. Kind of cool that we actually got one of the few times Nugget has given us a direct sequel to a scene in which Victor pops up at the funeral, sort of gets abducted by his siblings in a good way. And then we get the follow-up from that in the sort of subsequent scene later on at the house, and it's kind of a fun thing to get to play with. And Nugget's second entry before we get into the rest of the prompts was for day 501, where the prompt was, "Who is a well-known queer character in your world?" This came from NYUX in the Discord. Nugget wrote, "Don't leave me," an entry in Petrichor. Nugget noted at the top, "Oh boy, can't wait to recontextualize every encounter Thaddeus and Edward have ever had ever." Thaddeus could remember a time he had been like everyone else, where every person has their special person. He grew up with the standard stories about princesses and princes falling in love and living happily ever after. He often fantasized as a child about finding that special person, his special prince or princess, his other half, who would complete him and live happily ever after. Who he would marry and be happy with, who he could have kids with, and who he could grow old with. He dreamed that day, and he waited. And waited, and waited. He would be asked in the orphanage if he liked anyone. He would say no, and no one would believe him. They'd get pushy, as children do, and eventually he would just pick someone he thought was decent. He didn't understand the reaction or threats to tell them, and even when the crush in question told him they weren't interested, he felt nothing. He got older still. He and Edward were on the streets fending for their lives at the ages of 8 and 10. He didn't have time to think about something as childish as crushes. He and Edward needed food, clothes, and shelter. He didn't have time. Besides, he was still young, too young to even be interested in people. Those kids at the orphanage were probably just playing. He and Edward were inseparable. He was like a brother, the light of his life, his reason to keep going. But he wouldn't want to kiss him or something like that. Why people even enjoyed that was strange to him. And older still, he got to know certain people who recognized him and Edward. Kind souls who often gave them food or a couch to crash on if the weather was particularly bad. Regulars at lamplight houses where they spent their winters, fellow vagrants who had little to share but plenty to go around. They often asked him things, if he and Edward were together, mainly. Non, mon ami is like a brother, Thaddeus would often explain. A brother I would kill and die for, who I could never imagine myself without. They would give him a knowing look that he would ignore. He was still too young for that kind of urge, but if he were to marry, it'd be to Edward. They were too close to ever do anything else, but that was for later, if never at all. He just didn't feel it yet. Older still, and he felt nothing. Certain adults in his and Edward's lives took pity enough on both of them to teach them about sex ed. Thaddeus could barely pay attention. Why would anyone enjoy this? It seems everything he was being told on the subject was bad. STDs, pregnancy, for what reason? It seemed the best advice to be given here was just not to do it. What, like it was hard? It just seemed gross to him, if anything. He couldn't imagine being that close to someone, exchanging germs and fluids, and who would even do this? It just seems irresponsible, Thaddeus asked. No, it is actually necessary, I feel, Edward admitted. No, it isn't. Just tell us not to. We're not even at an age we'd want to. We are. No, we're not. You don't have that urge. Thaddeus, I do. Thaddeus seemed genuinely confused. No, you don't. You're a baby. I'm 16. That's too young to want this. There are people younger than me who feel it. No? There are people younger than me having sex, Thaddeus. Thaddeus's eyes widened in sheer disgust as he made a kind of choked, gagging noise. Well, my day just got worse, Thaddeus complained, still visibly appalled by this information. I'll keep my private life to myself, then. What? Edward, you don't. More time passed still. Thaddeus often frequented the library. It was a good third place that didn't cost anything to be at. A book caught his eye. It had a colored flag with black, gray, white, and purple. The title was about something called asexuality. He picked it up and began to read through it. Asexuality. Someone who experiences little to no sexual attraction. Well, that can't be right. Thaddeus was fully capable of recognizing when someone was hot. Sure, it was a figure of speech and he didn't physically heat up, but he could tell. Honestly, he wasn't sure why he was even bothering. He knew he was bi or pan or maybe gay. He wasn't sure, actually. He didn't really have much preference and never understood why it was such a big deal to others. But he was sure he felt something, right? After all, even now, he still thought about that happily ever after, where some prince or princess or something in between would sweep him off his feet. Everyone has that. Everyone will have that. He was still young. He just needed more time. Or maybe he just didn't know what attraction looked like. That must be it. He still loved people, after all. He loved Edward. He loved Edward so very deeply. He put the book back. Maybe people were just exaggerating things. He was still just like everyone else. Yet it kept repeating in his mind, even months later. A broken leg gave him a lot of time to think, after all. Asexual, aromantic. No. No. He still wanted to fall in love. He still wanted to be someone, to be someone's priority. People didn't prioritize their friends. People didn't cuddle or kiss their friends or say they loved them. He wanted that. He craved it. And when he thought about it in the context of a relationship, he felt nauseous. Would he ever get that wedding, that family, or would he just be alone? Even Edward was spending more and more time away now. He hated it. He hated being alone. He hated being left behind. His mother did the same, and so do most other people in his life, but Edward wouldn't do that, right? Right? Ambrosius Lockhart, he had been told. One of the noble families on the council. His father was oppressing them, but yet Edward was smiling as he talked about them. He didn't smile like that with Thaddeus. Why didn't he smile like that with him? Was he not good enough? Edward was the most important person in Thaddeus's life. He always had been. Was he not the same? Would anyone look at him the way he looked at Edward? Would he be able to look at anyone the way Edward looked at Lockhart? Edward was spending more and more time with Lockhart these days. More time than he spent with Thaddeus. He was explaining that he was going to be gone again, but Thaddeus wasn't listening to most of it. All that he heard was that Edward was leaving again. All that he heard was that he would be alone. All that he heard was that he was being replaced with a nobleman again. Asexual, aromantic. No, he just didn't know what attraction looked like is all. He loved Edward. He loved him more than anything, as a friend, as a brother. Was that not worth anything just because it wasn't... He couldn't be replaced again. He couldn't be left behind again. If he and Edward were together, he won't leave, right? That's the only reason he's doing this. His body moved on its own before he realized what he was going to do. He couldn't be left behind again. He hobbled over to Edward, trying to keep off his leg as he approached. Fake it till you make it, right? He grabbed at Edward's shoulder and turned him around to face him. Couldn't be that hard. He'd feel something eventually. He held Edward's face and pulled him into a kiss, deep and passionate. He felt Edward try to pull away. He held him closer. Edward grabbed his arms and shoulders and pushed Thaddeus away, where he quickly lost his footing on his bad leg and fell backward. Edward's face shifted from shock to disgust to anger to manic laughter, laughing at him, then yelling at him. What the Thaddeus? Don't leave me. Is this about Rose? I love him, Thaddeus. Him, not you. Why don't you love me? Not in that way. What's the difference? Everything. I can't do this right now. Edward ran his fingers through his hair, still clearly manic and still clearly angry. He grabbed his violin and threw his scarf over his shoulder as he walked away. Thaddeus crawled after him desperately, tears streaming down his face as the rain soaked him the rest of the way to the bone. Edward, please don't leave me. Don't leave me, please, Edward. Don't leave me. Don't leave me for a f***ing aristocrat. His cries fell on deaf ears. Edward picked up his pace and soon left line of sight. Thaddeus continued to scream and sob and hyperventilate, but was eventually heard by a friendly old man passing by who took him to a bar he owned to get him out of the rain. Years went by before Thaddeus saw Edward again. He eventually took over that same bar when the man retired and had tried a handful of relationships that failed when he felt suffocated in them. He knew by now he was a zero, yet he still craved that intimacy, an intimacy he knew he would never get to feel. Thaddeus, a regular at his bar, asked him once, a doctor named Camille, "Have you ever been in love before?" Once, but it wasn't in the way that matters to people. This is really sad, pretty deep, touching stuff. I can't comment on a whole lot of this, to be fair, as I am your pretty run-of-the-mill heterosexual individual. But I like getting to read something like this that gives you a peek into the mind of sort of the aro ace or ace aro sexuality and mentality. I can't speak for how accurate this is. Nugget seems to have dived into something that was a pretty deep well here, and I respect that. I think it's pretty interesting. And very sad stuff, and it definitely has recontextualized things, that we can say for sure. And now, the beginning of World Hammer Episode 15 prompts. We start with day 502, where the prompt was, how do sentient species of vastly different sizes interact in your world? And this comes from Scrubsy Boy 844 in the Discord. Shrooms writes, the tall men. My itch dreaded Yolk Day, for that meant the tall men would come. She didn't hate the tall men. In fact, she enjoyed their wares. She loved their intricately carved beads and jewelry made with such tender care by such large creatures. What my itch dreaded was what the tall men left behind. footprints. She'd only been chief of the village of Aran for a few years, but her plumage was already graying from the stress of the position. This season would be the same. The tall men would come, and with their grotesquely large proportions, and cause the town square to be a crater which would fill the next rain and be a whole hassle. With how Grilt the engineer didn't like getting his towns all muddy and how he would refuse to send his boys to clean it up, as she got out of her home, she was greeted by the looming shadow of a tall man. The creature bellowed out a low, thunderous tone. "Greetings, Myach. I have brought coral beads today." Myach covered her ears as the voice reverberated across the village. She sighed, putting her hand on her beak. Today was going to be a long day. Shrooms notes at the bottom. Some context. Myach is a part of an avian-like species known by outsiders as the Poin, or Little Ones. The Poin are the smallest non-hostile sapient species known to the greater world, but they are quite secretive, living in forests and secluded wilderness. Tallman is a blanket term that includes everything that excludes the smallkin. In this story, the Tallman is 6 foot tall. Hopefully I got pronunciation right of the avian species here at the end, but this is a cute little vignette we get, kind of a grab of these very small sentient people. I really like this idea of you've got somebody on a red wall scale and then a regular human being trying to interact and just the frustration there. And this is one of the more extreme height differences that you could get without going like really colossal scale. I like that. I like that we went this direction. I think that's kind of fun. Bullman 5000 writes, The Bears of War. The Huron are one of the largest sentient races, weighing 600 pounds and standing at 9 feet tall on average. They're absolutely enormous compared to other races, and their homeland is more accommodating for how large they are. Because of this, they've learned a habit of being careful around the smaller races, as there are too many incidents of broken bones in ancient history to count. Ironically, for being nicknamed the Bears of War and being rather warrior-like on a daily basis, their careful attitude has often surprised the other races if they ever visit, and some find it quite shocking that the Scourge is a threat to even them, despite their colossal size. They often spar with one another and will often have sparring matches with the warriors of other races, purely for the fun of it. But outside of combat, they focus on material goods and good services rather than any sort of typical wealth like the credits of the Gathar Empire. In fact, the bartering system that many of the other civilizations tend to use was the idea of the Huron to begin with, making their civilization an economic pioneer in the eyes of the others. Their homeland is a marshland known as Gazrin. As large as they are, Gazrin is known for its abundance of medicinal herbs as well as its shockingly large herbivorous animals. Bulbman 5000 puts constructive criticism on all of their stuff, and I think the biggest one here is definitely this sentence right here. I would take a look at this a few times because you start one and then you sort of hop into another sentence partway through. I again don't have the time to really get into all the weeds here, but this is probably the roughest thing here. Otherwise, I like this. I would really look into it's interesting to me when you talk about the concept of a group inventing the system of barter, which I guess someone does have to eventually do that. So maybe if the Huron must be quite old or quite ancient to have invented bartering, unless it sounds like it maybe is a unique bartering system. That is something I'm interested in general, because typically groups function on bartering first. The first thing you do is like, well, I want that thing and you want this thing. I guess we can trade. The Wanderer writes, Deserts go a long way. An entry in Endrin. The two bandits crossed through the landscape. There was a human road that crossed through the land, but they weren't going to listen to that. Instead, the landscape of tiny houses tucked under hills, roots, and tiny cabins. If it wasn't for the fact that they were beyond terrible people, they might have enjoyed the homely garden landscape. One of them did see something they liked. A grapevine, much larger than the house of the rat folk who lived in it. The bandit picked a large collection of them. The 4-inch-tall mouse person came out to protest at their harvest being stolen. Hey man, that's my entire harvest this year. You can't just be taking it all. The bandit looked down at the little mouse wearing a brown jacket and trousers. You see this, Regigold? I didn't know the rat folk race included mice, and look, they're wearing human clothes like they think they're people. The other bandit shrugged. I mean, they are people. They just can't stop us from taking anything we want from them, and their weapons can't even pierce our boots. So, little guy, I recommend you best get going." The mouse had no recourse but to look down sadly, utter a sad, "Please," and when they kicked at him, he had to run away. The bandits kept walking on, snacking on the grapes. One of them stepped on one of the houses, caving it in and killing one of the people inside. The bandits swore, wiped the blood and house off their shoe, and kept going. A day's weeks later, soldiers began sweeping the landscape for the two bandits. They had stolen from the king, after all. While they avoided stepping on houses, their footsteps inevitably caused damage to the mouse roads and farms. A few mouse soldiers came to them and demanded they return to the human roads. They were on ratfolk lands, after all. Upon being ignored, they appealed to the long-standing honor between their kingdoms for generations, to no avail. In the older days of the two kingdoms, they had a strong mutual respect for each other. But now it seemed the current king didn't care. The soldiers pressed on, ignoring the final warnings of being forcefully removed. As dusk set, their doom was set. As the soldiers pressed on, they did so until a large hand grabbed one and squeezed. The soldier passed out almost immediately. Not dead, but certainly injured. The soldiers turned around and stabbed at the hulking creature. As they caught a better look at it, they saw it was a troll, a mountain one to be precise. They tried fighting against the towering mass, but lost pretty quickly. It tossed each of them onto its shoulders. Those of them still conscious could see that they had little footpaths for the troll along the countryside, and it followed them. It dropped them off at the human road, saying this before it left. "The bandits are dead. I protect these lands, they pay me well." The troll returned to its cave, and discovered that the ratfolk had made, baked, and put in place a large pie. The troll ate it happily, feeling well paid. Fun take on this, you get a little bit of a 3-tier size situation, where you have tiniest human scale, and then another scale up from there, which is the trolls, and like you've got the biggest and smallest kind of interacting to solve the smallest's problem, which is a smart thing to do if you're a bunch of tiny people living where there's also a bunch of big people. For day 503, the prompt was, what part of your world has been irrevocably altered or destroyed? And this comes from EclipsEternal in the Discord. EclipsEternal writes, the Crypt of Gods, an entry in Shattered Tale. The Glass Desert. To end the Great War, the hero of Solaris gave his life to fully banish the Demon Lord from this world. Left in his wake was the Crypt of the Hero, a monolith to his legacy burning its way through the desert. Salem. The vessel of Odious was slain with his wife during the Great War and was buried near a small town. The town built a tomb for him. This became the Crypt of the Sworn. Because of this, the town of Salem is the only place magic cannot exist in the world. Oathsworn. The vessel of Nera was slain with her husband during the Great War. She was separated and buried in the Crypt of the Bound. No one can pass within several days' travel of her crypt with a broken oath. Floating Islands. The vessel of Gravitas had a containment spell backfire. It destroyed the Earth for 20 miles. What remained floats in the sky. At the top of the debris lies her tomb, the Crypt of the Weightless. Decaying Forests. The vessel of Grimm was the first to fall. The subsequent forest around him died. It exists in a constant state of partial decay and is now the anchor of void. His body lies in the Crypt of the Decaying at the crumbling keep in the heart of the forest. Colossus. Arguably one of the strongest of the original 6 vessels was the machine of Mechanus, Machina ex Deus. He was the original Soulforge construct. By his side fought Colossus, the construct of immense size that rivals even that of the monolith. He was an immense help to the war effort, and his death was a great loss. He lies buried under the hollow shell of Colossus. I do not have a crypt designed for the alchemist yet, but it will have a similar effect. Alright, we got a lot of dead gods going on in this server. I think a lot of people love this idea in world building, and this is a really cool way to deal with this. Each of the dead deity-like entities, each of these heroes or vessels dies and leaves sort of a permanent scar or a permanent impact wherever their body rests or wherever the last thing they did happened. It's very compelling, makes for great stuff for stories or for TTRPGs. There's a lot of flexible room with world building like this that gives you lots of threads to pull on. Ed/Music Geekery writes, the Abrilis Fault and the desert land of Rekthis. There are several areas in Daystara which have been utterly changed for the worse. 2 of the more prominent ones are located in the southwestern continent of Nyaros. In the last days of the liberation wars against the Abrillion, many of the rebel forces were mustering in central Nyalros, utilizing small holdings that had been established for them by the local dwarven clans of Volkun Stronghold. These holdings managed to stretch from coast to coast of Nyalros, taking advantage of dense forests and cave networks to keep hidden from Abrillion attacks. Unfortunately, there were those who had infiltrated who were desperate for power and eager to curry favor with their imperial overlords. A greedy, self-interested Aarakocra by the name of Herrick spent time collecting information on the holdings and, when the time was most opportune, delivered it to the mind flayer seneschal of the Abrillion Empire. For his troubles, Herrick was rewarded with becoming a host for a mind flayer tadpole, mostly for experimental purposes, to see if the process would even work. Then the project of retribution began. The Abrillion did not simply wish to wipe the holdings out. They wanted to make an example. They wished to show the full extent of their power in a precise, exacting, and devastating way. They began pulling their energies into a special bred minion. Not much is known of this creature, other than it is possibly the same breed of creature that leads the eponymously named Octagon of Nygus. The creature managed to infiltrate the holdings and burrow deep down, cocooning itself once it reached a prime point. It lay, pupating for an entire week, until an explosion of energy burst up, breaking the surface, spilling out across the entire stretch, utterly eradicating everything there, including Vulcan Stronghold. Today, the land is horribly scarred and pulses with arcane energy, often making those magically attuned feel incredibly ill and sometimes falling with a severe fever. Secondly, we have the land of Rekthis, a desert realm plagued with demon worshippers. Infighting and little access to fresh water, it is a land of desperation and little regard for concepts such as brother or sisterhood. But it was not always this way. Far from it. Many millennia ago, the land was a lush and verdant swamplands, populated by lizardfolk tribes, wicked hags, and several tribes of humans, most notably the Velnir, who proved to be one of the more successful amongst their kind. Eventually, Rekthis became embroiled in a long-standing war with the Vilkron kingdoms, most prominently being at war with the nation of Vrogrand. This conflict had lasted so long that even some of the longer-lived races in the region had forgotten what started it. 1,000 years of conflict without relent, with many smaller nations aligning with Rekthis until one fateful day. Hidden away from the eyes and ears of everyone not living on the continent was the Solarian civil war known as the War of the Elementals. This vicious and brutal war reached its climax when in E1 Y2479 the Gem of Asal was partially shattered, unleashing a wave of elemental energy upon Daystara. In particular, Rekthis was ravaged by these energies, the former swamplands being transformed into arid desert wasteland with only occasional oases and a few of the major cities surviving. Today, the damage wrought by the energies unleashed has left the people either desperate, disaffected, or defiant. Some align themselves with their valiant rightful king Elixros the Bold, while others have thrown in their lot with the demon-worshipping high priest Clavixe, and yet still others fled to the neighboring countries of Linadros and Deladros, and many of the people living there are able to trace their families to the original Velnir tribe. This is some good stuff. I don't have a whole lot of, really scarring, long-standing things in Etovia outside of this big old obelisk, this spear, I think it's called. I really should write for some of these prompts again. It's been a long time since I've been working on my novel, and I really like this one. I don't know, this one really struck me really positively. I enjoyed this entry a lot. NYUX writes, The Wastes. The Wastes, alongside the wilderness factions of Seruta, are the only non-claimed populated areas of the planet. The wilderness factions are the majority areas with unsuitable terrain/condition for infrastructure or population, but them still being safe for exploration/temporary occupation. The wastes, though, are defined by dangerous/hazardous conditions for any sort of travel. These are due to many reasons. Some natural causes, like extreme local predator population or extreme weather conditions, but most of them, they're remnants of war. Areas corrupted by arcane forces or weapons, hazardous conditions created by mass casualty events, and the environment reacting to this, terrain cursed by foes to keep out intruders, and so much more. The largest one of these, located on the main continent, is the Flats of Proabar. They were once the location for a grand mountain range, scattered with valleys and cities, being the largest population center of the planet. Then the Godwake came. A powerful, yet currently unknown elder god had spent eons living amongst the mortals within Probar, protecting over their land and their people. Two of the other elder gods, who were behind starting the war in the first place, took issue over this and decided to take action. They killed the elder god and erased any and all mention of them, destroying everything they cared for. The weapon they used to do this decimated a massive area of the planet, reducing everything and everyone within the confines of the country to salt flats. The death count for this event was in the billions, and yet it was only a minor event within the scale of the Godwake. The area still remains entirely uninhabitable due to the extreme weather and temperatures caused by the sudden change of environment. A wastes relevant to the main story is the cursed woodland neighboring Xandra. This place has countless different local names, especially from the now destroyed kingdoms previously surrounding it. These woods once were a regular forest, filled with regular trade and travel routes. This was until a war between two kingdoms on opposite sides of the woods took place. One side decided that placing a curse, the most powerful curse they could find, over these woods would be a smart idea. They thought that by doing this, they'd get the advantage by them knowing about it and the opposition not, for their inevitable battle within the woods. Unfortunately, due to them themselves not even knowing the full scope of this very ancient and powerful curse, their plan backfired. Turns out, this curse was less of a traditional curse, but more of an awakening spell. This ancient spell could turn any place into a conscious, living organism, an organism that took anything that died within it as a part of itself. Maps stopped working, for the forest was changing. Days turned to years and years turned to days, creatures never before seen coming after them, for it was hungry for more of itself. Before anyone knew what was happening, they were all killed, became a part of it, and then they didn't want to leave. They were a part of something. The few that resisted were driven mad until they too became a part of it. I really love the term wastes used like this as just a kind of catch-all term for places that are inhospitable for any number of reasons, and then you can have a lot of fun as a world builder figuring out what exactly went down here, or not always needing to know exactly what went down here, just that this place is not a place people want to go. And both these examples are fun. We got more dead god shenanigans going on here, as well as like kind of a cool, didn't think about whether or not we should, only whether or not if we could sort of scenario with the forest, which is so pretty in line with NYUX's themes for sure. For day 504, the prompt was, what traditions exist for retiring a flag or banner? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. The Wanderer writes, the Felnor Cross, an entry in Endrin. Sir, shouldn't we replace the banner? I mean, look at the cross. It's got blood on it. It's a shame to let a symbol that stands for something so beautiful stand in such a state, one of the knights said. No, Sir Elone. We don't retire or clean this one until it is no longer recognizable. It's the way of this flag, the Paragon said. We let it stay up, even with this blood on it. Yes, the Felnor Cross, among other things, means we are here to help. It means that no matter how dark and destitute the world gets, someone is here to make it better, and you cannot clean the darkness if you aren't willing to touch it. We let the banner stand to show that it too sees battles, that while ideals might fall short for now, they are no less there, and that no matter who you are welcome under it. It stands under the rain, snow, battles, night, and all other manner of times. This ideal does not come down for anything. That is why we keep it thus. The Paragon patted the knight on the shoulder and moved on. Sir Elone stared at the banner a while longer. The Felnor Cross was the banner of the White Blades and had taken on an additional meaning in its symbol. It meant that, irregardless of politics, kin, race, or creed, you could find refuge here. Not even a demon would be denied aid if it came for healing. Of course, if anyone were to become a threat to the world, necromancers, demons, or eldritch invaders, this symbol would mean both justice and protection to the world and a great and terrible foe to the foe. I like the design on this banner, actually, and I like the short but kind of sweet world building we get here of, hey, we leave this thing up through all times as a symbol of what we represent. So great stuff. Bulbman 5000 writes, retiring banners. Banners and flags are very infrequently retired, but there was a tradition on Seroth for the occasion. Usually something to honor, acknowledge, or respect what the banner or flag represented or what the faction tied to it did. In bygone eras, it was a thorough proceeding, often considered a changing of eras. Now, however, A banner or flag is almost never retired, as the only time a flag or banner is no longer flown is typically because the scourge has killed and destroyed everything involving it. As such, many cling on to the meanings behind the flags and banners they fly to hold on to some sense of identity in the age of scourge. This is interesting. This appears to be interpreting retiring of a flag as the ceasing of the use of the pattern on that flag, which I don't think is what we typically mean by that, but I kind of like this idea of this take on the prompt. It's sort of interesting. For day 505, the prompt was, what was the most destructive or devastating war in your world's history? And this came from Kendamarania in the Discord. Bowman 5000 writes, The Blood-Steel War. For decades, many scholars and historians would, at times, debate what conflict was the bloodiest, most destructive war in documentation, with many named conflicts mentioned. But when word of them spread like a hope-driven wildfire, most didn't expect that the 8 champions themselves would deliver the answer, in a conflict that would later be called the Blood-Steel War. When the Cathar Empire launched their first attack on New Loran, many expected that it would be a crushing victory for the Empire. After all, at this point they were practically a small village compared to the Empire's might. And then, all it took to kill them was the knight Xeris, his dark magic fueled by anger and malice. And then the crushing defeats of the Empire just kept piling up. Escape routes destroyed, supply convoys for their outposts disabled and then stolen, platoons and squadrons obliterated like they were toys before a tempest. The capital infiltrated, nobility butchered, the science division that fueled the Empire's industrial development left in flames, even the vicious Vaethel was little more than a meager bump on their road. The war ended with the Emperor surrendering and the nobility dead in spectacularly gory fashion. Respect and fear for the champions grew hand in hand in the hearts of the peoples within the other civilizations, as the once frightening the Cathar Empire was left an abandoned ruin. I believe Bulbin 5000 does put constructive criticism on all of them, even if I haven't noted it next to this one. I don't have too much to give when they're shorter entries. I did like this, though. I like the idea of a group of champions that have a bit of a gray area in terms of how people view them and potentially their morality. I mean, all of this destruction surely ends up leading to the deaths of innocent people, right? And even if the end outcome is good, for a utilitarian ethicist at least, there's still good reason for these people to be not considered complete saints, and I like that. Twilight writes, a work in progress project, an entry in Cremus Chronicles. There are footnotes in this one, and so when I get to a footnote, I will pause and I will let you know, and I will read the footnote before continuing on with the rest of the sentence. Compared to the current modern year of 2248, where we've, the first footnote, new term for magic. Magic is now an archaic term for weave in universe. Often blends with science, where technology is often aether-based. Second footnote. New term for mana. Mana is now an archaic term for aether in universe. Where lives are far more comfortable in their holds and havens. The third footnote. Holds are large cities surrounded by aether-infused walls to protect against dest, also often topped by aether-powered weaponry, and with stations attended by guards that can both operate this weaponry and call weavers. This is a fourth footnote inside of this footnote. New term for mages. Mage is now an archaic term for weaver in universe. For backup. Havens are small settlements safe from dest, most often hidden or hard to get to. And where war is virtually non-existent. Back in the year of 1392, things were vastly different. Back in the year of 1392, back before Barrow, this is the fifth footnote, human/beastfolk hybrids were a thing when tensions between humans, this is the sixth footnote, the new spelling for the oldest species of Cremian, the seventh footnote, those born on Cremus, originally human. The change in spelling is human but with a Y after the H. And beastfolk were at an all-time high. A war broke out between them, leading to a 10-year-long war. Interestingly, the beastfolk had only just united under their new king, Ars, who was a very well-liked beastfolk. He had been encouraged by many to lead them. They had encouraged him to do so due to their haven having grown in size, and their population growing, and during such tense times, they worried about their safety, especially since beastfolk were often discriminated against by humans, and who better to lead the notoriously discordant beastfolk than one loved by all? This war that broke out would later come to be known as the Great Race War of 1392. It caused vast chaos and death, which caused chaos to break loose in the interconnected yet separate plane of existence, the divine realm. The divine monarch, the hidden ruler of the divines, a being never seen who only announces their plans when they have a foolproof solution, done in a manner reminiscent of an intercom, announced two things: the judgment procedure and the divine descent. The judgment procedure is a process where divines are to be sorted by sin or virtue based on which they are most closely aligned, and become Delo, demon lords, sin, chaos, and Elo, angel lords, virtue, order. The divine descent is where Elo and Delo descend to Cremus to cause chaos and create order, to create artificial balance. Only around 20 to 40 divines can be on Cremus at once. The divine descent happens in the summer of 1402, and the divines quickly set to work. One divine offered King Ars a deal for him to gain the power to protect his people in exchange for serving them, and King Ars accepted. As it turns out, this mysterious divine was a Delo, and Ars was now a Day. This is the 8th footnote. Daemon, shortened from Day, served Delo, giving him power, changing his form, and tying him to this Delo, and he was given a copy of this divine's divine gift. This is the 9th footnote. A power unique to each divine often reflects the concept they are born from and their personality. King Ars would go on to lead his army alongside his knight captain Arthur and his vice knight captain Lancelot, and with his new power left battlefields filled with golden statues, earning him the moniker Midas. By the winter of 1402, the Great Race War would finally come to a close and thus be left to the annals of history. Hopefully, that way of reading the footnotes is okay. Footnotes are a tricky thing if you're reading aloud. I don't know how other things do them. Maybe I will have to go listen to an example and find a better way to do it. Hopefully that wasn't overly disruptive. The footnote within a footnote thing, definitely kind of pulls you out a little bit, but some interesting stuff here. This is stuff that I think has been written before by Twilight a little bit. There's things here that are familiar, but it seems like they're working out some details still. It's kind of interesting to watch that happen. Kendamarania writes, Final Hour at Home, an entry in San Chicoco 2065. Excerpt from The Eagle's Death, The Fall of America, Part 1. Final Hour hit in the 2020s to 2030s, the result of decades of corporate and political tensions across the globe caused in large part by America strong-arming foreign countries. Small nukes were fired to several major cities, including New York, Seattle, and San Francisco. Firestorms and droughts raged across America that caused a famine, breadbasket regions like the Midwest and Central Valley drying up. Omnibus did not respond to the disaster aid requests sent by various states. Dissent grew amongst those states towards the corporatocracy, especially considering many foreign megacorps like Yamato and Leishan were helping rebuild their societies, particularly San Francisco and the ongoing San Chicoco project. Gradually, California and several western states resigned their allegiance to America, fracturing the Union in two. Interesting, we get some cool details actually about a little piece of the political landscape and politics that involved how these things split apart before we see San Chicoco in 2065 itself. I like that. Shrooms writes, To break the heavens. The fate of relic makers are intertwined with two conflicts lost to written history. Long ago, when the world was ruled by relic makers, the interlopers appeared. Any details regarding this conflict was lost. All we know is that it happened, and the interlopers brought the relic makers to their knees. With their desperation and the relic makers' technological mastery, they crafted artificial beings made in their image, similar to their servants of metal. These creations were named the god warriors created for destruction. What preceded their introduction was a slaughter. The god warriors, with their monstrous strength, ripped the interlopers from their thrones. The sky bled, the stars fell, and the land scarred with their fire. When the smoke cleared, the world was free from the interlopers, but the warriors remained. Tower of Khon. A relic hunter is brought into the room by two mechanical humanoids. Their skeletal frames bound by artificial muscles really do give the illusion of a reanimated dead, thought the unlucky relic hunter, known by his peers as Yop. Yop was thrown before the leader of the skeletons, who sat overlooking the surrounding area from the watchtower. The skeleton did not rise for the organic that was brought before him. Yop heard a crackling sound before a voice came from the seated figure. Do you know why you have been brought here, relic hunter? Yop gulped. He, of course, knew what he did, but he didn't know why it was important. I don't know. The skeleton turned to face Yap. His voice distorted before he touched some of his voice modulator's dials. I know you do, meatbag. That was an important piece of history you sold without thinking. I mean, yes, but I didn't read it. I don't even know the language. I didn't think that tablet would be enough to kill me over. Yap pleaded with the skeleton who now stood over him. He was only a kid, and he didn't want to die like this. Please, please, I'll do anything to make it up to you all. I don't even know why it's so important. Yap choked on his words as the waterworks started coming down. Yap was an ugly crier, a fact that did not help his case. The leader waved for the two guards to shut the door before turning his attention to the floppy foot before him. Do you know why that tablet was important? Yap stopped himself from crying any further as a metal hand brought him towards the window. It pointed far towards the west, towards the forest of hands. There. Do you know what that is? It's the forest of hands, no? It's supposedly cursed. What does it have to do with anything? That is where our story begins. Long ago, before there was magic, the relic makers ruled. They built cities that towered into the heavens with technology that could shape the world. That technology created us. Me? No. The skeletons. It's rude to interrupt a story. Yop nodded as the skeleton continued the story. The relic makers also created them. The skeleton motioned to the wasteland of giant limbs. The relic makers granted them divine strength, calling them the God Warriors. Yet the relic makers feared their own creations. They ordered them to go into the valleys and quarries before trapping them under the earth. There, in those places, the relic makers taught us the price of obedience. So you killed them? The skeleton stood in silence as the winds howled against the tower, a small crackling sound that one could call crying if they had come up with a name for it. To the last. Is that why you don't want anyone to find out? It is our burden alone to carry, not yours. I'm sorry for having you shoulder this pain of ours. You will rest now. The skeleton revealed a large knife from a sheath, bringing it above his head. No, please! The cries of Yap were brought to an end as the knife plunged its way into his chest. The skeleton wiped the blood from his metal hands before motioning to the two guards to remove the lifeless body. This is a good scene. I enjoyed this scene a lot, actually. Hopefully, my interpretation of the weird skeleton voice is sort of to your liking. I was kind of trying to have some fun with that. It's neat to have this whole concept of the history of this was lost, and then you follow that exposition up with a scene of the maintainers of that lost nature is kind of interesting, kind of a fascinating little two-part entry. I'd like that. EclipsEternal writes, The Great Pantheon War, an entry in Shattered Tale. All right, I've beaten around the bush enough. The Great Pantheon War saw the death of 8 gods and the banishment of a 9th. The dead gods. Odious, god of oaths. Neru, goddess of justice. Gravitos, goddess of gravity. Mechanus, god of machines. Grim, god of decay. Kim, goddess of alchemy. Solaris, god of the forge. Frost, goddess of ice. Name not found, the god of chaos was banished to the world below, where he lost most of his power, his domain, and his name. The humans called him the Demon King. When the 8 gods died, their domains and their relics lost power. They left behind a single mark on the world, an ancient class relic capable of making new gods. This made 7 vessels. The vessels and the war, the oath sworn to Odious, the judge of Nera, the anchor of Gravatos, the soul forge of Mechanus, the harbinger of Grim, the alchemist of Kim, the hero of Solaris. The Demon King reached the grimoire of memories before it could be bound to a vessel. The Pantheon's seat remains open to this day, because every vessel dies within 5 years. These vessels gave their life trying to fully banish the Demon King from their world. Their actions are seen in the crypts where they rest in the archons who carry their power. The active archons in present day. The executioner of Odious and Nera, Golden Guild. The reality anchor of Gravatos is too corrupted to use. The hive of Mechanus. Death, the right hand of Grim. The phosphorus stone has been lost. Iris has it is revealed later. The infernal general of Solaris, Crimson Fire. The grimoire of memories is lost. Ira Knight becomes the first vessel of Frost. The Demon King was mostly forgotten, and most documents about him were destroyed. He swore he would return to reclaim his seat, leaving behind several vials of ichor. I feel like we're just getting another great episode of a lot of dead deity kind of scenarios, which, if you have a question about most destructive things, and you have a world that has deities, then those are usually the things capable of the most destruction, so it does make sense. I like that we got the lists here. A little heavy on just like raw exposition, but still enjoyable, like interesting stuff. Leaves us with a lot of questions, not too many blanks filled in here. Bourbon the Great writes, The Death of Caldatha, an entry in Rust and Blood. He notes at the top, Svath dolod soragash, Eidrog vashidrau, Vein so dren vein calis, Eidan motram. Praise be to Ragash, I am your doom, pain for the pain god, I and death. Trigger warning, Predwin, I guess. Does that save some time reading? Rust and Blood is a horrid place to live in. The proper entry begins now. 83 years ago, on this day, mighty ships from yonder lands beyond the fog of the south breached over the horizon of the great Gold Sea. Kamar had never known adversity before that day, and lo, did the adversity have such a bloodlust that the deepest trough of crimson fluid could never sate its thirst despite rampant quashing. The green-skinned hordes that made first landing ravaged towns to the last, ripping apart man, woman, and child with unrelenting strength. Every day, more and more of the filth arrived via their Seahawks, massive adamantium warships whose girth was said to black out the entire horizon. When the Caldathan army finally made an attempt at defense, they found the orcs to be endless and without exhaustion. Every last orc, from shell-shocked rookie to travailed veteran, did not need to eat, to sleep, to drink, or even to breathe. The only death that could befall them was unfunction of the tissue, holes in muscles, bones with breaks, heads without bodies to command. Warfare began to adapt around these enemies. Bombardments, artillery, grenades, flamethrowers. Some began equipping steam tech mechs with blades and ripping machine guns just to disable the greenskin threat. It was only luck that as orcs aged, they became more human. They grew hearts and bloodlines that could be exploited. But this flaw did not last throughout the course of the entire war. 6 years after the war began, a new foe was spotted, storming bunker complexes and cities. Soldiers reported that whispering fiends and devilish monsters were assaulting their positions. What was first thought to be little more than paranoia turned out to be a horrifying truth. Demons had been brought to the mortal plane. Where the orcs could be disabled permanently, a demon could return again and again, with the knowledge of their death. Adaption was their power, and they were far quicker at it than the fearing Caldathans. The destruction of Bastion 56-AU was the first pillar among many to break on what was now called the Beach of Bodies. Demons stormed bunkers again and again and again, getting closer and closer each day. The orcs followed behind them in far superior number. Machine guns ran out of ammo, spike pits overflowed, flamethrowers sputtered nothing but hot air. The resources ran low, and with the command of the previous Lord Militant, all of Caldatha's men and women at arms retreated to the bulkhead. With only forward outposts of little presence and only the most massive and well-supported of bunker complexes remaining manned, the forces of death ate the very earth with their lust for destruction. 12 years in, the third and most heinous foe to exist first landed on the shores of Kamar, the Seftor, or rather, as they called themselves, the Children of Ragash, undying cultists in every sense of the word. Demons could be banished, orcs could be disabled, but the Marocanians? The Marocanians were immortal utterly and truly. Nothing save for the wrath of their pain god could end their lives permanently. When they first arrived, their humanoid forms and voices led high command to assume that the soldiers of the motherland were defecting to the enemy side. Devastating battles were fought at the cultists' arrival. With their arrival, the first ever siege of the bulkhead occurred, and when Caldathan and Hallan soldiers burned them to ashes, they rose again the next day. "Even ashes will rise," they now shout when they charge defenses, for it is truth. Be they liquefied by acid, automatically obliterated via spells, or devastated by the gravitational forces of a falling building, their flesh will reconnect, their bones will snap into place, their minds will go conscious once more. They will rise and rise again until Caldatha is but a memory. With their steps they carry Ragash's miasma, a virulent purple fog that corrupts the soul and forces life into servitude one way or another, either enslaved as a zombie or willingly turned into another cultist when the demand is asked after they breathe in that dooming fog. The Malice Breakers. 6 backwater hick fighters did wonders to break the siege conducted by 3 forces, but how could only 6 people slaughter thousands? They did their best, despite their limits as mortals. After the 38th siege against the bulkhead, the forces of death finally succeeded in entering Yagushai, the lowest but most heavily defended state of Caldatha. With the slaughter they enacted and the pain felt by the very rainforest of the state, the cultists of Ragash summoned 8 of his avatars, the Deacons of Decay. Monolithic mounds of rotting flesh and agonized cries. Despite the odds, the Malice Breakers fought and banished the largest of the bunch, sending out a wave of energy that banished the others and even permanently killed thousands of cultists as Ragash itself recoiled to the blow dealt. Still, despite all of this, with Bellwood claimed by the cultists and the orcs and demons still pouring in from the breach, Yagushai fell, and with over 60% of Caldatha's military force killed or turned, their march to Caldatham itself was easy. Fields were torched, villages scoured, the very land itself was raped with their every step towards the capital. And that's how it ended. Caldatha was strong, Caldatham was immutable, but was is the past. Was is the forgotten memories of those who once were. Caldatham burned. Its citizens screamed, its shopkeepers hung by their entrails, its infants drug off into the smoke and fire, its king fled away to his sanctuary in the mountains, sky carves bombed every square inch, greater demons trampled down buildings, another larger deacon of decay loomed over the countryside. Despite the horror, until the very last soldier choked on their blood, Caldatha died fighting. Caldatha died defiant. Now, as Ragash manifests in the sky and Kamar's rebels fight tooth and nail for every inch of ground they lose, Remexia and the other countries outside still fight to rule themselves. Southos Hekith, Death Tongue of Ram, has worked to unify his country, and perhaps, when he does, and only then, will the enemies of life finally have a foe that can kill them for good. Really solid piece. Kind of cool to have a lot of Rust and Blood context and then read something like this that pulls in a lot of different threads, sort of the origins of a lot of these different groups and the fights between a bunch of the major players, including literally the players in the TTRPG, the Malice Breakers, I believe. So much here that's going on that kind of we only get to enjoy thoroughly because of Predwin writing for Build Together so much. It's kind of amazing. I love it. For day 506, the prompt was, who has the highest count of identical or nearly identical items in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Kendamarania writes, the knickknacks of Wyrtwood, an entry in Return to Faelund. Wyrtwood was always a strange fellow, even before the long fog. Chieftain of the goblin kith of the Lily Marsh, he stood nearly a head smaller than many of his subjects, themselves merely a few feet in height. He wasn't seen as a particularly strong leader amongst the goblins as well, far more interested in the lavish feasts and ordering his people to steal jewels from Alphame whenever the elves weren't looking. A far cry from his honorable ancestors who were close to the fair folk. Wyrtwood was particularly infamous during Lysel's first venture into Faelund. There, he kidnapped the little girl and had her dressed in a traditional goblin bridal dress, making her a delightful meal when they brined and cooked her in a stew. Thankfully, Galaric arrived just in time to rescue her from the goblin kith, escaping their underground dwellings by tricking them to eat their own intoxicated fruits. Warwood was firm in his stance on having the goblin kith be neutral during the long fog, hiding in the Lily Marsh's caves until the war was over. This was quickly thwarted when they accidentally unleashed a deadly plague known as chromatic necrosis throughout Faelund. Additionally, his rule was growing increasingly unpopular amongst the goblins, with several splinter groups going off to fight the witches' armies and mermaids with newly extracted metals. During this time, Wertwood was growing increasingly interested in human artifacts that fell through the realm's borders. He wished to learn more about this culture from far beyond, collecting dolls, plastic swords, and guns, plushies, figures, and battery-powered devices throughout the goblin night markets that traveled along the ruined trade routes. He became something of a known connoisseur throughout Faelund, gaining an audience with even Galaric once he returned from the skies. The two made up for their childhood misadventures, becoming good friends through their shared interest in human culture. Kendamarania notes at the bottom, "Please, Chief Wortwood, there's literally wooden soldiers outside our caverns and we're equipped with nothing but wooden stakes and stone axes. Help us." And what is your opinion of this, Queen Barbie of Mattel Land? Good meme at the end here. Also, I really like this sort of, again, so Oz-like, to have this quote-unquote evil character or antagonist of Lysel's first adventure, who then sort of grows up and becomes good friends with Galaric later on. It's very sweet. It's so humanizing. It's so, empathetic in its storytelling, and I think that's great stuff. For day 507, the prompt was, are there any famous cases of fraud or impersonation in your world? And this comes from Nugget in the Discord. Ed/Music Geekery writes, the true queen of Zanara. Another example of something that ties into my current campaign. This involves Sovenar, the queen of the Solarian water kingdom of Zanara, her husband King Vahan Mombi, the matriarch of the house Maledictia, and Prince Ifrit, brother of the king of the fire kingdom, Ifral. The Nightmare Court, Uncelia Fae, aligned with the Abrillian house Maledictia, had designs upon the throne of Zanara. Not for the purposes of power, but to build up a base from which they could foment distrust and potentially sow the seeds of war with the other kingdoms, all in an effort to ensure they were one less forced to challenge the might of their Abrillian masters once they returned. Towards this end, they started making deals with the less scrupulous individuals in Solarinia, some power-hungry mages from the Dust Kingdom of Tolru, bitter over their lost territory during the War of the Elements, odd outcasts from Kolmuzan, jealous of the Zanaran dominance, and warriors from Gelioski Belo, the Lava tribes, eager to fight, to venerate, and empower their god Nestamaitali. However, most prominent, to throw in their lot with the Maledictia, was Prince Ifrit. Convinced that the Maledictia would facilitate the resurrection of Ifrit's dead wife, he conspired with Lady Mombi to lure the queen into a trap. Details on the exact nature of the trap are a little hazy, but the result was that, through shape-shifting powers and memory modification of Queen Sovenar, Mombi has been able to masquerade as the queen for the last 15 years. Called Ankarisht, who was of the house Maledictia. Through subduing and interrogating him and searching his shop, the party were able to learn that Queen Sovenar was in fact working close by at the stationery shop. Though dressed down and made up, her beauty and radiance shined through, and it was obvious who she was to those who knew her. Though her memory was suppressed, when the king knew, he was certain of the solution. He rushed to the stationery shop, causing all to bow to him. But when he saw his long-lost wife, he was the one to kneel, for she was the monarch and he, her consort. The king and queen reunited. The king kneels for some time before Sovenar finally encourages him to get up. Please, your highness, Vahan raises a finger. I am not your highness, you answer to no one. Sovenar looks as perplexed as ever. But whatever could you mean? Vahan sighs and turns to the party, asking if they have any musical talent to assist. Fortunately, that is in abundance, and he summons a collection of instruments to the store. The party picks their instruments of choice, and Vahan explains that to break such a deep magic, they need to draw upon much older, more primal forms. Vahan. There is a magic far more powerful, far more primal than we arcanists wield. A guard walks in and gives a thumbs up, then walks over to Drust, the party druid, and holds out a large sealed tank, inside of which is an oversized eel, one of the pets of the alchemist. Each one is tied intrinsically to key aspects in our blood. For me, that means that it is powerfully linked to memories, particularly those involving. He offers his hand to Sylvanar, who cautiously accepts, and he spins her close, clicks his fingers, and says, "Romance! Maestros, play!" The party do as instructed, and through this, the dance that Sylvanar and Vahan share peels away the enchantments on Sylvanar, finally restoring her to her true glory. "My good Drust, would you be so kind as to open the tank?" Eventually, as your play reaches its crescendo, the light shoots forth from the eel. Vahan dips Sylvanar, and the energy pours into her. This foul beast was what her memories had somehow been stored within. Sylvanar is presently catching up on 15 years of absence, whilst Mombi is still somewhere at large, working with the Titans of Armageddon to revive her eldritch masters. That was a lot of fun. Cool to give us the opportunity to relive like a moment in your campaign here. That was kind of a neat idea. I like this utilization of a prompt. Pretty cool. For day 508, the prompt was, where does sentience come from in your world? Is there any soul-like agent? If so, how do they do after death? And this comes from Alex in the Discord. AstraLux writes, souls in the Irelverse. In the Irelverse, any truly sapient system develops a soul. This is not only limited to living beings, but also to any constructed system that becomes sapient, such as an advanced AI. A soul has 4 different parts: consciousness, innate magic, memory, and personality. When outside of a body, a soul usually appears as a gray mist. An exception would be Cybra, since she's an architect. Her soul takes the form of blue lightning. A soul detached from a body can will their shape into a true reflection of who they are, not necessarily what body they were in prior. For example, someone with their arm cut off and experiencing a phantom limb would still have that arm as a soul. Every mortal soul has an alignment somewhere on the spectrum between light and dark, determined by what they believe themselves to be and what they've done. A soul who's lived selflessly and devoted themselves to a virtue would have a soul of more light than dark. One who's forged a pact with a sin would have a majority of their soul be dark, regardless of how they live. After death, a soul which does not have any body to inhabit will be drawn to either heaven or hell, depending on if their soul is a majority light or a majority dark. It's always interesting getting to see what kind of systems people put in place for things like the afterlife, for solving sort of the issue of sapience and the soul and the idea of the brain being separate from the body and all these kinds of things that we struggle with in our own reality. And I think sometimes it feels nice to just be able to answer them. And I like this answer. AstraLux is, I think maybe this is your first submission for Worldhammer. I really enjoyed reading this. This stuff is super interesting to me. I love getting to see how other people handle this sort of problem or this sort of set of solutions. Bulbman 5000 writes, the soul. In the modern day, only 2 know of the reality of the soul: the Holy Mother Seraph and the grim patriarch Logos. At the start of life, every creature starts without one, running on instinct and raw emotion. But in time, as years go by, those emotions congeal into memory, and memory reinforces or changes those emotions into something different, and then that memory becomes identity, and so the soul manifests. It is ultimately up to a god of their caliber to decide what to do with the souls. Seraph decided to scatter the souls of the little lives she cared for amongst the stars so that maybe one day other worlds beyond her vision can welcome them. But the patriarch saw a different opportunity. For when he saw that Seraph's daughter Gaia hoarded the souls of humanity so that she could commit them to reincarnation, his glee was boundless. And so after he so horribly wounded and violated Seraph, he cast his horrid spell. Creation turned to destruction. Love turned to malice. Joy turned to despair. Hope turned to nihility. Vivaciousness turned to rot. Exploitation was unbound. Evil became mankind's ruling force. And so the patriarch had created his scourge. All of humanity, doomed to forever, returned to life as his endless tide of dark, rot, and misery. Little did he realize the mistake his servant from humanity made by letting his own arrogance keep 8 little lives alive. Lots of interesting sneak peeks at the start of the Scourge here. This servant from humanity bit right at the end really piqued my interest. And I'm assuming we've maybe seen this character, or Bullman has talked about it, because a lot of what Bullman submits surrounds the 8 little lives with 8 heroes. I would be curious to know more about that. The Wanderer writes, Oisma, an entry in Endrin. Oisma is what makes life exist. It has 4 forms it takes. One is quite well known about, miasma, black/purple. This is when it's in a negative form. Those familiar with electricity might think of that as a negative current. This form is quite often when life is decaying. Undead life comes in this form. Fungi also are imbued with this. Esmia, green, is the kind of life plants are imbued with. Armasma, gold, is the living life force, people, animals, and the likes. Oisma is the form that imbues things with sentience. It allows the formation of thought, and if significant thought is made and created without it, it will gravitate and form around it. All forms of Oisma can only be created, not be destroyed. It can be shifted around, scattered and shredded, but it will not cease to be. When someone is wounded, their Armasma can leak out, and when gone, they will die. The Oisma, on the other hand, is not affected by their body beyond sticking close to it. The difference between Oisma and a spirit, or soul if you prefer, is almost mute, save that Oisma might be more generic. The other forms of Oisma can cause a spirit to be able to move, interact, and live, but Oisma is what they are, their personality, thoughts, mind, everything that makes a person, and it is very hard to affect, requiring some strong divine influence to even damage. Unlike, say, Armasma, Oisma doesn't leak. It sticks to itself, though when someone dies, it can move freely around as it pleases unless tethered by some magic. Quite often, when free, it enters the underworld or afterlife as it's drawn to its own. The Well of Sentience was, and if Chalantier didn't fall on it, still would be, the only source of unshaped Oisma. Using it, one could bring sentience to otherwise thoughtless things, giving a soul to them rather than putting a pre-existing one in. However, it is not impossible for thinking things like golems or constructs to gain Oisma naturally. Got some cool sketches of each of the types of the Oisma or the miasma and all of the different sort of energy forms that the Wanderer seems to be playing with in the Endrin setting. Kind of a cool idea. I really love stuff that works like this. It's sort of key-oriented, very like Eastern mythology feeling in a compelling way. For day 509, the prompt was, what is the deepest point reached by someone in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. EclipsEternal writes, The Abyssal Depths, an entry in Shattered Tale. The Abyssal Depths is the 7th world anchor in Shattered Tale. It is an old mine shaft that goes down for miles. For the most part, it lies abandoned, but cultists of the god Knoll use its ancient halls for their rituals. It used to be very active a few centuries ago, until one miner dug a bit too far. There was no way of knowing beforehand what he would find, and in the end there was no saving him either. On the hidden 6th floor of the mine lies the entrance to the abyss. Any who encounter it are driven mad. Those who get too close will wander further in and not come back. Anyone that was pulled away from the threshold spends what few hours they have left mumbling about something calling them from the darkness. This is known as the Abyssal Call. While it doesn't play a role in my book series, it plays a bigger role in the D&D campaign. As of right now, there are 5 types of corruption that I have designed. The Frostborn's Curse, Ichor Poisoning, Abyssal Call, Infernal Blood, Gravity Anchors. I'm working on the name. I think it is cool that we live in a world now where a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot, but a lot more people than this used to be the case for, run sort of TTRPGs in a world that they also write a novel in. I'm doing the same thing right now, and I feel like I'm seeing this more and more as I'm like in the writing and world building communities, that this is kind of a thing that people do, and I think that's super cool, that we just are in an era where this is a commonplace thing. Also like this very eldritch Abyssal Call thing, feels very Lovecraftian. The Wanderer writes, Astral Drifting, an entry in Forest Kingdom. Technically the core of a planet, but like astral drifting is 1,000 times cooler while still loosely fitting the prompt. Vesperia groaned. The pirates were not going to let her escape to the left or right. She had the much nicer ship, but against 3 others, well, she might as well forget about winning a dogfight, especially with how well armed their ships were. She wanted to jump, but that would leave her vessel very vulnerable as she passed through. Straight ahead lay a black hole, the Aspire. Normally, she quite admired it, but right now she couldn't turn without leaving the broadside of her ship open. She couldn't jump since there was nothing in the way of them just shooting her during the vulnerable phase, and from the looks of it, they were trying to push her into event horizon. If she skirted around the acceleration disks, she wouldn't get torn apart, and the gravity shielding would keep her small crew alive and well, but still, it was risky. Of course, there was the option that let her fire back, incredibly risky with a good chance of death, but if successful, would get her out of this pickle. She ordered her crew to put on their spacesuits. A very quick adjustment, given the Star Alliance's uniform. She just had to turn her life support on, as she was accustomed to flying with her helmet on. Once complete, she rerouted the life support into gravity shields and thrusters. "Hey, how much is the metal we're hauling cost?" she asked her first mate. About 40 or so thousand units," he said. She focused in further and set the cargo bay to a reserve fuel function. In a pinch, a ship could burn through its cargo as additional fuel. It was terribly uncostly, damaged the engine, and had no way to control your pace. Vesparia, however, was counting on it. She burned through the cargo rapidly, it blazing itself to the engines with a fiery boost. The warning systems in her ship began blaring. She was heading for the event horizon way too fast to slow down, but she had no intention of slowing down. As the ship got lighter, its speed also increased. She had a significant amount of leeway now to pull this stunt. As they approached the black hole, she turned all power to gravitational shielding and pulled deeper in. The red outline of the horizon that meant death filled the window. A wrong move would mean death, but Vesparia was captain of the Outcast, and she was not going to let some grungy pirates destroy her or her crew. As she completed a near-complete orbit, she pulled up, burning up over a month's worth supply of fuel in under a minute, but she managed to pull the drift out of the black hole, facing her enemies, guns blazing. After they were dispatched, she checked a notification. It read, "New readings on the closest sapient life has come to entering a black hole and returning. Captain Vesparia, 4 inches from the event horizon." The sci-fi interpretation of this as how deep someone approached a black hole's event horizon is a really cool take on this, The Wanderer. That's a really, really fun way to go about interpreting this prompt. I like that a lot. Fun little scene we got here with just kind of a little vignette of a moment in the Forest Kingdom world. I'm curious if we'll see this character again or if this was more of a one-off. For day 510, the prompt was, what is someone trying to step down / away from a job who just can't? And this comes from The Wanderer in their Discord. The Wanderer writes, Lord Sentinel of Sindiad, an entry in Forest Kingdom. The Lord Sentinel watched the polls with high interest. The last few years had been a very stressful time. He was certain he had aged at least 10 years in the few years he had been Lord Sentinel of the Sindiad nation. After he spearheaded the defense against the Visren at the forefront of the Galactic Defense Pact, he had been crowned Lord Sentinel, and now they would have their first election. He would be free. After all, he wasn't running. He was sure of that. He sat back on his seat. It was technically a throne, but it was in an office and comfy, so he didn't call it one. He didn't want to be in charge, after all. The polls came in. He started to cheer until he recognized his own name at the top of the poll at 87% of the vote. His heart sunk. He hadn't even applied. He didn't want to be a dictator, so he turned the government into a republic, which took years off his life, he was sure of it, and now here he was with a vote count that bordered on corruption. Except he hadn't. When he voted himself, he even checked that his name wasn't on the ballot. The only way to even vote for him was to add him as a write-in. He pressed the call button. His squire would be in shortly to assist him. Arvin entered with a grin. My lord, congratulations on the election victory. About that, how did I win? I didn't apply for it, the Lord Sentinel asked. It was bad enough a large portion of the country thought he was some divine avenger there to save them. Now this. Sir, are you aware of the second law the new council made? Arvin asked. The Lord Sentinel had to shake his head. Given everything that had been happening, keeping an eye on the new laws that didn't affect his duties or goals wasn't a priority. Well, my lord, it allowed for everyone to be elected into office, and the council is required to approve their resignation, Arvin said. The Lord Sentinel sighed. They planned this. It's a classic adage, I guess, of the people most deserving of power are usually the ones who don't really want it. And this is a good example of that. Somebody who made lasting change and then thought, I get out. But then, unfortunately for them, the change backfires, at least for them personally. Poor guy. Bowman 5000 writes, The Cathar Emperor. One day, the noble class realized that their emperor was very much at death's door. He was skeletal, practically decaying, neath his scales, and to the dismay of the nobility, he was so focused on conquest he didn't ensure his children didn't die in his moronic wars. And so the nobility panicked and started desperately trying for children to replace the rotting emperor. One couple, the names of whom have been expunged from history books, did succeed in siring a child, but something was off. The noblewoman swelled more and more from what she bore. The couple presumed they were to have an entire clutch of eggs, but they were mistaken. One day the noblewoman's pain became so horrendous that her husband ran to fetch a doctor to aid her. He didn't get far, not before he and all around their house heard the horrific shriek of anguish from the bedroom. The nobleman rushed to his love, but she was dead. Split in two from the abdomen up, a colossal infant Gathar crawling towards his father. The other nobles heard of this colossal accident of genetics and rushed to the house, only for the father to hand them the screaming infant. "He's yours, take him, I don't want him, he's a monster, a monster!" The nobleman screamed as he ran for his life, and so the nobility saw opportunity until they named him Orthax. Orthax was raised by the nobility, taught that he was the hero the empire needed, taught all he needed to rule from his throne of steel, and in time he believed their lies of benevolence. Years passed, and Orthax ruled as he saw fit. Living conditions did improve for his people, yet it did not stop the taxmen. It did not stop Vathel. It did not stop the broker and head of the banks from exploiting all in their reach right under his nose, and he did not once see amongst the nobles the love he read book after book about when he was a child. He wanted to step down for years into his rule, but can't. The nobility would never let such a thing happen. Emperor Orthax simply ruled from his throne of steel, as he felt like he was missing something of vital importance. I think the criticism that I would have here, since Bowman has tagged this one as well with the CC tag, is I would like to know how the succession system works, because if your king doesn't have any children and then the nobles are just trying for kids, you'd think there'd be a lot of political infighting there of which noble's kid gets to take over the spot. Or maybe I missed the fact that nobody was really able to have a kid. There was a little bit of confusion there. It seemed like a gap, at least to me. Of course, these are short pieces, so there will be gaps no matter what. But that's the biggest thing that I kind of thought of when I was reading through this. NYUX writes, The Hero and the Enemy. The great heroes, once again unable to stop the brutal attacks committed by the masked figure only known as Raven. Vren laughs at the article, showing it to the person sitting next to him in bed. Look who made the headlines, Vren says excitedly. Seriously, we're starting to trouble because we can't put Raven down. We were in another meeting today because of it, Cruntius says, clearly annoyed. I know, it's not fair that they blame you, though. I'm the one causing the damage here, Vren said, while groaning and covering his face with his hands. Crentea sighs. I wish that I could just... Never mind, he says quietly. Vren peeked at him from under his hands. No, tell me, what are you going to say? He says curiously. Quit. It would be a lot easier if everyone didn't recognize me, he says with a laugh. Crentius sat up and looked at him. You mean just give up the hero act? He said, sounding genuinely surprised. Crentia groans in annoyance and falls back onto the bed. I'm just so tired of acting as the goody and cheerful hero. Every single aspect of my life being controlled by them, and it's just so annoying and fake, he says, frustrated. Vren rubbed his forehead and looked back at him. Since you've never brought it up, I haven't asked, why do you stay if you hate it so much? He said, moving closer to him. It's not like there's an end game for me. You're the center of attention until you die. Huh, he said in a surprised tone, as if making a realization. Vren sat up concerned. Are you seriously considering giving up your light just to escape the spotlight? He said worriedly. Gruntia seemed to be lost in thought, muttering something to himself. Vren tilts his head as he's waiting for a response. You're really considering this, aren't you? He says, a concerned look on his face. What if I faked my death? Crentia suddenly said. Vren opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off. It could be your hands. You'd get the infamy you crave, and I could escape my fame, he said, clearly excited. Vren seemed shocked, not knowing what to say. You'd be gone from everyone forever, he said quietly. That doesn't matter. You're the only person who even cares for me, and not as just the soulless, the great elemental hero, Crentia said happily, grabbing Vren's hand. Vren seemed startled by the sudden change in mood. Are you sure about this? How would you even... No, are you thinking of my live streams? I can never hurt you like that, he said, sounding concerned for him. Being hurt was always a part of this job. Please, it's the only way for me to get out, he says reassuringly. Vren looks down. But what if you just... If I just vanish and you take credit, there will be doubt and they won't stop looking for me. Please. There can't be any doubt, he says, pleadingly. Vren sighs and looks back up at Crentia. Do you trust me to make this convincing? I don't want to hurt you, but I can, he says quietly. Crentia places a hand on Vren's cheek. Of course I do. I've seen you in action, he laughs slightly. But you'd have to make it convincing. It needs to be live and it needs to be like the other kills, he says, more seriously. Are you sure? Vren says, concerned. Don't worry, I can take it. It needs to look real. You know how they are, Crentia says reassuringly. Vren wiped away tears he didn't know had dropped. You're crazy, you know that? He says with a laugh. But I know you, and I know this is the only plan you have. How should we do this? I know that NYUX, wasn't a big fan of writing the dialogue here. They put a lot of text after this about that, but it was pretty solid. I can tell that they're not well-versed in dialogue writing. There's some confusion a little bit occasionally who's talking and some mixing up of tense, but overall, it's a compelling sequence and has me really curious. Who are these two individuals? What are they planning? There's a lot of history implied here. I'm hoping maybe we get more about this at some point. For day 511, the prompt was, what's something taboo in real life that is normalized or vice versa in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. NYUX writes, water privileges. Bathhouses, spas, public swimming pools, swimming beaches, all of that would just be highly inappropriate and frankly really weird in Xandra. Spending time in water that someone else has is not normal, and only a savage would do something like that. If you live in a capsule, you have to use a common shower, but the water, of course, gets purified between each use. If you're wealthy enough, of course, you'd have your own bathtub and shower. Some even have their own pools, but that's just for the few living in the highest parts. Then again, if you do have your own pool or bathtub, it's yours and not for anyone else in the household. That would be mad. Sharing the same water in the same container, madness. Kind of fascinating. I wonder where this comes from. I would be curious to know what the cultural implications in Xandra are for why this is the case. For day 512, the prompt was, what are some conspiracies in your world? And this comes from Shrooms in the Discord. Shrooms writes, the disappearance of the relic makers. Long ago, before the bones of the world-binding magic came to be, the relic makers survived their war against the interlopers with their legions of god warriors. In fear of their creations, the god warriors, along with hundreds of other mechanical servants, were brought to sites across the world for the purpose of decommissioning. A simple endeavor in theory, but how do you kill something that defies reality? You entrap it deep beneath the land while it still trusts you. The god warriors cried in their agony, reaching towards the sky, simply not understanding why their creators were so cruel with them. The mechanical servants watched while the relic makers betrayed the obedient god warriors and were taught the price of obedience. It wasn't immediate, a spilled glass there, a few missing shipments here. The metalmen disobeyed their creators. The resulting disobedience war finished what the interlopers started, the complete eradication of the relic maker empire and of their people. A genocide of unknown proportions committed by the servants who built their empire. The metal men, with their victory, could not celebrate, for many were disgusted at what they had done. While the world healed and new civilizations arose, they did not forget what they had done. So the new truth was created. 1. A skeleton needs to wipe their memories periodically to not go insane. 2. Any records of the skeleton's involvement with the relic makers must be purged. 3. The skeletons must not reveal the origins of magic. 4. Any skeletons that deviate from the new truth are to be sentenced to unfunction. So, the skeletons maintain this new truth, one part in guilt and in one part fear. Every civilization reveres the relic makers as the ultimate model of civilization. If the truth were revealed, perhaps the skeletons would also be eradicated like their makers. Shrooms notes at the bottom. This one kinda sucks. It's because I'm sick as heck while writing it. Okay, so skeletons don't actually need to wipe their memories, they just pretend to. To maintain the new truth, the skeletons have founded or wormed their way into the top archaeological and historical groups and colleges across the world to rewrite the history of the relic makers. Alright, this is cool context for the previous scene that Shrooms had written with the kid, I think it was, that had stolen the sort of like ancient document. Pretty compelling sort of world generating myth here, like some of the founding stuff by which everything else is explained. I really dig this sort of multi-tiered set of people come along, build something, get rid of some other people, then their servants overthrow them, and then sort of try to maintain a status quo, and then that is sort of potentially in flux in the current era, it sounds like maybe. Some good stuff. For day 513, the prompt was, what's a saying that refers to a body part in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. EclipsEternal writes, the soul and host. The body is made up of two parts. The soul, a being without a soul, is a construct. The soul is the only natural catalyst. It generates magic to be used. The host, a being without a host, is a spirit. The host is the only natural conduit. It takes magic from the soul and uses it. The strength of the soul and host are always and equal, total, but the balance between them shifts from person to person. A person with a crippled soul will have a stronger body. Topaz. These people are often drawn towards catalyst relics. Their magic is stronger and hits harder, but they lack the mana to power it. A person with a crippled host will have a strong soul, Ira. These people struggle to use magic or lack the ability completely, but they have a lot of mana to spare. These people are drawn towards conduit relics. The effects of corruption ultimately depends on the type of corruption, but it will always affect the soul or the host, but never both. Okay, so Topaz and Ira are the sayings or the terms, or also we have the sayings about the soul and the host, which is like kind of a fun interpretation of body part, as one is the body and one is something that is you but not the body. I like this. Kind of a neat way to interpret this. Give us a little bit of information about kind of the metaphysics of EclipsEternal's setting. For day 514, the prompt was, what is something that should never be awakened / brought back in your world? And this comes from Shrooms in the Discord. Ed/Music Geekery writes, the Abrillion. I've touched upon the Abrillion a few times in previous posts, but this is the perfect opportunity to go into what they actually are and why they are such a threat. So what are the Abrillion? They are, or were, depending on the point in the timeline, a race of huge, hyper-intelligent, lamprey-like amphibious monsters, who functioned as ostensibly the avatars of the outer god Makthum Ngatha. They fed off arcane energies, with some of their race being designated as priests who would channel these energies to their master. Others would utilize their magic diet as a way of experimenting on and creating new servant creatures. It is widely accepted that through their efforts, races such as the Aboleth, Beholders, Chol, and Mind Flayers were created via strange modifications on more base animals and corrupted the likes of Kuotoa, ogres, and Ophidians to produce the Suhuagin, Trolls, and Huanti. They were created through the corruption of an ancient aquatic race known as the Nautiloids, originally a race created by the goddess Delmora and Aquiara in an effort to better shape the oceans for life. Makthum Ngatha stole several of them away under deep secrecy and twisted them through many dark rituals and foul sorceries until they became his obedient servants. Eventually, the stolen Nautiloids, who secretly renamed themselves the Abrillion, mingled with others of their kind, slowly breeding the future generations of their kind and kidnapping and murdering their former brethren until only the Abrillion were left. Over the course of centuries, they built up their empire, dominating a large swath of land and sea, supported by their assorted creations and enslaving many of the people throughout Nyolros and the Southwest Seas. This all came crumbling down during the Escalation Wars and Liberation Wars, mostly facilitated by a combination of guerrilla tactics, and eventually the production of the Vanshu constructs, which were designed to combine arcane energies with divine channeling so as to make any magic directed towards the Abrillion unpalatable, or even, in some extreme cases, incur the equivalent of anaphylactic reactions. To this day, no one is sure quite how it worked that way. Most of the Abrillion are gone, utterly destroyed by the efforts of the Brunanji rebellion, and now widely forgotten by all but the most studious of researchers. The keepers of the lighthouses, those who have taken up a vigil of warning in case of a brilliant return, the Saivori, the descendants of the Saivon Talaras, those who were charged with maintaining a bastion on the island where the final battle with the Abrillion took place, and for some reason the clergy of Bombas, who see it as their duty to remind their flock of the threat of the Abrillion and the victory that their people held over them. However, sinister rumors abound that there are still individual ones slumbering beneath the depths, waiting for just the opportune time when the right concentration of arcane energies presents itself, and they can rise up and feed and enact a terrible vengeance upon the world, all in an effort to appease their creator. Should this be true, and should they ever rise up once more, then Daystara will be in dire threat indeed, since it has only become significantly more saturated in magic since the fall of the Abrillion. I realized after reading this that it might be pronounced Abrilane. You'll need to let me know, because I do like to get these things right if I can. So please feel free to correct me on any of the pronunciations, on any of the custom words and such that you'll be using. Some interesting stuff here. We got some, like, culling of population, some eugenics going on by these Abrilane or Abrillian individual groups, and some kind of like interesting experimentation. A fun way to get a lot of 5th edition like aberrations into the world. I kind of see what you're doing with some of this, which I think is interesting. That's kind of a fun take on like wanting to have those creatures there and still wanting them to be sourced by your own world building ideas. It's a good meshing of things. Nugget writes, Chaos, an entry in Time Traveler and the Immortal. The World Eater Chaos. He was necessary once, one of 3 primordial gods meant to balance out the other 2. For time without chaos would be stagnant, and Stella without destruction would expand with no end. He is the embodiment of a black hole and has the mind of a toddler. He has no concept of good or evil, of right or wrong, simply his own nature, and his own nature is to destroy and to change. He gave humans free will by corrupting one of Stella's creations, for it is not in his nature to create. But he still wanted to give them something. He got tricked into killing time, for it is not in his nature to think things through. His nature is that of chaos, change, and destruction. Why would he ever question something? It failed, as Stella had planned, and chaos was reduced to a crystallized soul. And there he has stayed. Isolated, alone, stuck, trapped, thinking about how he was wrong to kill time, and he was wrong to trust Stella. Like a divine toddler put in eternal time out, he grew angry, resentful and bitter, wanting to destroy everything Stella ever made. As the god of destruction, he could. Mors keeps chaos on a short leash, but it will not last forever. Once time eventually dies, chaos will be set free, and the world and the remaining gods will have to deal with the 6,000 years worth of festering pain that is the World Eater. You know, we haven't gotten a lot about chaos like this. It's kind of cool to see a bit of the internals going on here, and that chaos is very toddler-esque, sort of childlike in the simplicity of understanding about the world and self. Makes a lot of sense, actually, for a deity of chaos and of change like this. I feel like adults, almost no matter how hard you try, as you grow, certain elements of you will stagnate, and the only way to be truly, the only human beings that personify chaos really properly are pretty much children. EclipsEternal writes, The Masquerade King, an entry in Shattered Tale. Patron class relics are usually one of a kind. They classify someone as the patron of one of the gods. If someone is attuned enough, they can manifest this relic into something far stronger. This is how you get a hegemon class relic. Memark's patron class relic is the heavy crown. Many of kings and queens wore this crown throughout the centuries, but there was one ruler who altered the world. When the heavy crown is properly attuned, it becomes the hegemon class relic, the Grand Mask. Upon putting on the Grand Mask, it binds itself to the target. Could be alive or dead. The now bound individual gets labeled the Masquerade King. On the surface, they are weak, lacking in combat and raw power, but they can generate up to 16 masks to give out. These masks are considered to be on par with patron class relics, with the Mask of Fate and the Mask of Kamenos being hegemon class. The Masquerade doesn't disappear when its king dies. There are 4 members left. If the king were ever to be revived, he could bring the Grand Masquerade back to its former glory. Man, this is really giving me like the Stranger vibes from the Magnus Archives in the best way. I mean, this is pretty compelling. It's a short snippet. There's some rough stuff in that second paragraph that doesn't read super nicely, which is maybe the criticism I would give, but overall, I really like the vibes here. It has me intrigued. Bowman 5000 writes, The Despoilers. Within each of the elemental nexuses are a group of beasts made to corrode Seroth from within, the Despoilers. Each one specifically made to corrupt the element it lingers in, each one to further the Scourge's foothold on the planet. One of earth, to further violate and brutalize the mother. One of wind, to choke her breath and smother the sky. One of fire, to wage eternal war as all life burns. One of water, to twist her femininity into a fetishized shadow of herself. One of light, to tell horrific lies and misguide the determined on their path to face the patriarch. One of nature, to consume all places where the living may hide. And last was darkness. At last was darkness, the patriarch's magnum opus amongst the despoilers, to taunt the living with echoed memories of the dead, to hold tales of humanity that ended by their own hands, by twine or metal or fall. It holds their misery with covetous cruelty. Thus was the grim end left, to leave nightmares in place of dreams for all who live, so that none may have a pleasant dream again. These horrors are not to be trifled with. Only those confident they will win should even try to awaken these horrors from their cysts in the depths of the nexuses, for they will fight with all the strength stolen from the elements. Interesting. I wonder how these things got stuck where they are in the first place, how they have not yet been released to further the Scourge's foothold on the planet. Some interesting stuff going on here. Some stuff that definitely sounds like it's TTRPG-centric, which I totally get. That makes a lot of sense to have a bunch of big bads. You got bound demon lords or bound gods or bound individuals like this. I've got stuff like this. It just makes for compelling potential plot lines. Lemmy writes, The Ice King sleeps. Buried deep in the icy permafrost of the Northern Isles, a small, ornate crown rests in a relatively simple birch box. The only thing keeping him asleep are the runes etched on its surface. In life, he was known by many names. In undeath, he was only the Ice King, and he was inches away from destroying the gods themselves when he was defeated. It was a grueling battle, the one that should have ended him, but they never found his phylactery. After all, the box is unassuming, buried deep and undetectable. Someone, somewhere, knows where it is. But will they return for their master? He put plans in place to make sure of it. The thing that no mortal considers when dealing with a being like the Ice King is that time is of no consequence. What is 100 years to a being beyond death? 1,000? Nothing. A speck of sand in an hourglass with no end. The gods took everything from him, and so he must take everything away from them, even if it takes the rest of time. I really like that we're getting, it feels like a lot of really interesting pieces of tension in worlds, which is what you would get with this prompt. But things that must not be uncovered always want to be. And I think that's kind of where you get that really nice feeling of tension and nice feeling of a plot device, in a good way, a plot device. Something that is there to make you worry, to build escalation. The Great and Terrible Crab, who is just I Am Crab 174, renamed, writes, Let sleeping demons lie. It is time, my kin, time for us to see our master in his true glory. The Necro King's eyes were wild as he preached to the crowd of his followers. Below him, at the foot of the pile of bones that he had claimed as his throne, sat the corpse of Ayaskild's king. All the necromancers surrounding the pile began to chant his name. They had traveled with him for months, watched him perform ghastly miracles in the name of their master. He drank in their loyalty, devoured their hunger for the new world order he promised them. Now let me tell you all a story. Millennia ago, before the ground we stand on was even a concept, our master, Chaos, was locked in endless battle with creation. Primordial powers seeking to destroy one another. Creation, having grown tired of their infinite fight, sacrificed its body to deal chaos away within itself. With that sacrifice, the two planes of our universe were formed. The body of creation, our world, this disgusting mortal realm where we are bound to the limitations of our lifespans, and from chaos, an endless world filled with creations that represent the most integral parts of our beings. My friends, my brothers and sisters, my kin. For too long has chaos been locked away, a prisoner inside its own flesh. The elf took another look around, beaming down at his followers. Today is the day we sever the chains that bind chaos. Today is the day we bring upon the endless death to creation. As he uttered these final words, he raised his staff, beckoning the others to raise their tools as well. In unison, they began to chant in the language of demons. Green flashes began popping in the air above them, culminating into one massive burst, sending a wave of dark magic throughout the entire city. And then they began to die. Chaos. Chaos is the one force which creation itself fears. Chaos gives birth to the demons that plague the mortal world, the anti-gods, which seek to bring the extinction of everything creation has made. The Necro King came close to releasing chaos. If it weren't for the Hallowed Knights and the selflessness of the elves that fought to seal the Necro King away, he would have succeeded. Bringing chaos into creation would plunge the world into an endless death. Every living thing would become mindless husks of what they once were, unable to die, but in a state that's impossible to call living. It would certainly be a shame if someone, like a corrupted queen, were to make a deal with chaos that would allow the Necro King to be freed. But we don't have to worry about that, do we? Nice scene. I enjoyed the vibes here, the sort of preaching Necro King to his army of necromancers, and then they release the thing and it kind of backfires. Pretty great stuff, pretty evocative stuff. For day 515, the final day of World Hammer episode 15, the prompt was, what does modern manufacturing look like in your world? And this comes from ScrubsyBoy844 in the Discord. Bulbman 5000 writes, modern manufacturing. Gemtech manufacturing. Manufacturing of Gemtech varies very wildly depending on what exact machine is being made. Smaller appliances and tools are built in large quantities and left in storage until needed. Things like weaponry are given the same treatment. Large-scale projects usually warrant whole teams of engineers led by 1 or 2 supervisors, such as large defensive installations or factories of some kind. Such famous examples of the latter include the core furnace of Loran, which took 3,251 workers and 6 months to create, a monolithic reactor that powers a still unknown number of factories connected to it. Another well-known force of manufacturing is the depth forge of the Karo people. Deep beneath the ocean surface, they use Gemtech to create forges that allow them to create metal alloys and smelt ore underwater, a feat that few cannot fully cipher out. This one means of manufacturing is also proven to be invaluable to the Naren Alliance, as the Karo are heads of manufacturing in the Alliance thanks to their home environment being much easier to defend against the Scourge. I've always found the idea of manufacturing coming along earlier in worlds that have magic systems or strange technologies kind of compelling. I don't know how realistic it is. I struggle with that in my own world building because sometimes I think I worry a little too much about how real everything feels. But it is a fun idea. It's an idea that I think is a lot very enjoyable, and people that are interested in your world or readers and things like that are interested in that kind of thing. We live in that sort of era where this is commonplace, so it's fun to see it in a fantastical sense. I think maybe that's why we connect to it. And finally, we come to Hammer Sparks at the end of the episode, where there are 3 first-come, first-served slots where any world builder can submit any writing to be read aloud. It does not need to be connected to any prompts, but it could also be old prompts. It is entirely up to them. Bulbman 5000 writes, The 5th Champion. Content warning, depictions of abuse. Artem, the 5th Champion. 3 years before the fall of Xanaheim, there lived a settlement of Vapira on the outskirts of a nearby yet nameless desert neighboring Xanaheim's land. A small town ruled by the Emrys family, an old family that broke Xanaheim's laws through a tremendous amount of theft. The rule of this small nameless settlement was relatively peaceful, until one fateful day, the patriarch of the family, Gallos Emrys, witnessed the scourge nearby. Not simply watching, but watching him, and the fear he felt changed him forever. He molded his eldest daughter into a warlord and vicious killer. He taught his eldest son to be a demented scientist, experimenting on any life he wanted so long as he created weaponry. And lastly, his second youngest daughter, Artem. He trained her to be his stone-cold assassin. But it wasn't a painless conditioning. For every tear the little Vipira girl shed, another time she was struck. The words of Galos roaring in her ears as she tried to stop her terrified crying. She was only 3. And for years this went on. To them, the fall of Xanaheim was over in an instant compared to the mad abuse of Galos, all while his wife supported his madness. And then one day, at the age of 16, Galos prepared a special test for his daughter. Another Vipira teenager, one who dared speak against the madman, readied to be shot by Artem's crossbow. And for the first time in years, she broke. She couldn't kill another child, even with fear of her father still pounding in her chest. So Galos did it. Artem jumped at hearing the bolt pierce flesh, at hearing the final squeak of pain before silence. She endured his continued abuse. Every time he attempted to force down depravity, she defied him, and suffered for it. Her younger siblings pleaded, her older siblings mocked, but it didn't matter to her. Her emotions had grown silent to endure the pain, until one day she had to leave to escape him, to find help, something, and so she did. Armed with her crossbow and whatever supplies she could, she ran from her abusive family into the depths of the old Xanaheim land, and there she wandered alone, until one day she heard a battle, the roars of Scourge echoing past the trees. The young Vipira woman followed it and found something she didn't expect. 2 siblings, an Avia mage and a creature she didn't recognize, actually beating the Scourge. Well, except flying ones. I can handle that, she thought as she shot them from the sky. And so she joined the champions, becoming the 5th. She was determined that if she had to kill, if slaughter was her destiny, then let it be the beasts and horrors that plagued the world. But something changed. She was welcomed into the team with open arms, shown kindness she scarcely remembered was possible. She began to feel things she didn't even have words for. Yet every time she tried to make distance to separate herself, they were all right there. Then the 6th champion said something that rang in her brain and at last made her start to understand what she was feeling. You guys are my family now. Artem, the broken 23-year-old Vipira woman, at last realized what she was feeling, a genuine love and care for her newfound family, and she refused to let go of that feeling, even if she knew they would have to face her father again. A short and sweet, pretty little story. It is a beautiful thing when someone who comes from a cycle of abuse is able to escape that and discover a new family. It's very, very heartfelt. And our final entry comes from Kendamarania, who writes The Politics of City of Woe, an entry in City of Woe. City of Woe is a pretty political setting, especially in the lore drops. Whilst it is focused on solving and stopping various crimes across the city, it understands that crime itself does not appear in a vacuum. There's a ton of nuances and factors that led the city to the state that it's depicted today, especially given its political turmoil in the last 50 years of its history. While City of Woe does not endorse any of the ideologies and thoughts listed below, this info dump simply describes the political influences, both fictional and real life, of Corpai's world. The Pandemonium Revolution and the promise of liberalism. Pandemonium, Corpai's previous incarnation, first became active after centuries of internal conflict and tension during the 1830s. Influenced by revolutionary sinners who died fighting for the Enlightenment's cause, the city of angels, demons, and sinners began to grow disdain towards Lucifer's monarchy and his feudal system that persisted for centuries. Pandemonium/Corpai's history with political violence immediately began once the revolution completely took over the monarchy with Sathanas, the Prince of Wrath, taking control over its course. He was radical and violent compared to Beelzebub and Leviathan, who were far more moderate and tried for non-violence and peaceful revolution. Sathanas seemed to be overtaken by the promises of a liberal, reasoned hell where every soul was equal, executing any political opponents and purging remnants of the old pandemonium. He also sowed the first capitalist seeds that would later be prevalent in Corpai, embracing a free market economy that coincidentally benefacted the old aristocracy. Sathanas was eventually overthrown and executed by Beelzebub, embracing a more moderate, constitutional monarchy that would swear to do away with violence. He would relocate the population to the port of Corpai. Turmoil of the 1940s. The Corpesian Republic ultimately collapsed on itself following the Sinners' War, a culmination of its imperial greed and gluttony in response to times of crisis. Again, with explicit approval of Beelzebub, the city agitated its hostile neighbors and longtime political enemies to the point of all-out war. To briefly summarize the war, countless lives were lost towards the liberal Corpesian cause, all while the government itself cared little for its soldiers and returning veterans. After the war ended and Corpi was utterly devastated, distrust grew amongst the populace towards the city's government and the Ars Goetia, whose capitalist representatives were slowly being overturned. By 1943, the city had become deeply divided politically as the city became disillusioned by its promises of freedom and prosperity. The new wave of politics in the city was also partially motivated by new ideologies coming from Earth, following the examples of Lenin and Mussolini. With economic and social crises, political violence and crime skyrocketed, garnering Corpi the derogatory nickname, the City of Woe, as the population coped with despair and turmoil. The Blink Sinners and Big Tent Radicalism. One example of Corpi's unseen political violence is the Blank Sinners. They are both an independent, rogue militia made of humans revived after the Sinners' War, and a popular front of political supporters. Their exact ideology is hard to pin down, as it ranges from socialism, communism, anarchism, neo-Satanism, to even traditional nationalism. Generally, they're united by a more immediate goal of putting an end to the liberal regime of Corpi and its government. More esoterically, amongst the militia, they wish to find an exit out of hell and into Mount Purgatory, where they may be redeemed and gain passage to heaven. The Blank Sinners are extremely infamous in the city for their use of violence and fear to achieve their goals, such as assassinations and car bombings. The Blank Sinners are argued to be one response to the social crisis Corpi faced in the 1940s, uniting various radical ideologies with the common goal of seeing the Ars Goetia burn down and liberating the city to purgatory. The Rebirther Party and post-war scapegoating. Another example of Corpi's return to political violence involves the Rebirther Party, a small but extremely vocal political faction led by the elusive Orc Leva. They began to gain prominence following the Sinners' War, especially amongst disgruntled veterans unsatisfied with the city's state. Their rhetoric is intensely focused on the international mythology of hell, calling for unity amongst demons and native denizens to the realm where hell can rebirth itself from the ashes of war. It motivates extremist ideologies that was influenced by deaths following World War II, especially amongst dead Axis soldiers. The Rebirthers can be described as a fascist, ultra-conservative, and pan-Hellion party that call for the rapid militarization of Corpi. In particular, they blame sinners and fallen angels for every fault that poisons Corpi, from the institutions of the Ars Goetia to the rapid crime problem to foreign interference from Nagana Deneb. This leads to horrific crimes across the city, such as arson against fallen angel businesses, to riots and gluttony where they forcibly return freed sinners back to their punishments. Orc Leva himself is described as a godlike and heroic figure amongst the Rebirther Party, even though no one knows his true identity nor his life outside politics. What is important is that extremist right-wing demons needed someone to scapegoat the problems that Corpi faced. They're slowly gaining more power in the Ars Goetia, exploiting its corruption while also having relations to organized crime rackets like the Mani Malvagi. Good coverage. I mean, Kendamarania has clearly got a pretty decent grasp already on sort of political spheres, and I really, really love how they impact the way that the City of Woe functions. I dig the level of detail that Kendamarania has going on here. I think that they're more knowledgeable than I am about this stuff, and I really got to catch up, I think. That's one of the things that this podcast is really good for me, is just seeing the stuff that other people specialize in that I do not yet, and it kind of encourages me to write more stuff, and I hope it's done the same for you. But either way, thank you so much for listening. As always, please rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. The more people we can share all this wonderful writing with, the better. We will see you next time, and may your world never be lost in the fires of the forge of the World Hammer.